Design. What the hell?
I had the once in a lifetime honor of talking to Mumia Abu-Jamal this past Monday, partially due to Dr. Jared Ball. Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is a political prisoner who's been in prison in Philadelphia for maybe like 40 years at this point. He's obviously not the only political prisoner as a byproduct of Black liberation and Black radical movements in the 80s, but he's probably one of the most notable. His name has been kept alive via hip hop greatly, but also just the Black radical tradition. And there's just a project that's being worked on to bring more attention to his cause and his case. Is something I've talked about before. Like, it was crazy to be there to hear his voice, because, like, first off, if you listen to hip hop in the 90s that was in any way conscious, you heard his name. And then if you are in any way connected to Black radical spaces, back then up to now, you've heard his name. He's done a lot of work. He talks to Marc Lamont Hill on a regular basis. I even think they did a podcast together. Somebody talking about Rage Against the Machine did fundraiser gigs for him. Talib Kweli is another person who I've heard his name. He's fallen ill in the last couple of years, where people are worried about his health and wanting to try to continue to lift up his name and hopefully grant him a retrial. There was one political victory in that he was sentenced to death initially, and they did get his death sentence commuted in the early 2010s. And so now a lot of work is being done to get him a new trial. There's so much bullshit involved with this trial I don't want to get into. I'm not a perfect expert on all the details, and I feel like having those details are important. But more than anything, in terms of like people connected to that radical tradition space, he's not all that's left, but he's the most publicly known figure in that regard. When this call was planned out, we knew we were going to be calling in from cell phones to his prison phone. And so I was calling Dr. Jared Ball, and Dr. Jared Ball had me on speakerphone connected to another individual who was talking to Mumia via phone from prison. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, my phone was not getting him at all. So while I was there for the conversation, I got to ask questions. I literally have not been able to hear anything he said. And so this is going to be a first reaction to that. I never thought in my life I would be talking to like a legendary political prisoner. Even when I started down this path and started building a platform, it's just not something that really I thought about. It's humbling. It's intimidating on a lot of levels. You'll probably hear it in my voice when I ask my questions, because I don't feel quite worthy of the moment or capable. And I was arguing in the comment section of Dr. Ball's video with someone. There's no point in me being here if not for the capacity to balloon the reach of something like this as much as possible. There's just no point. I love that I made a Black Panther video. I love that I made a Bo Burnham video. I love all the work that I do. I love all my shit. I watch my own videos. There's no point in my platform existing as big as it is if I'm not able to do what this is. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so this is super dope for me.
Where we began with I Mix What I Like and my own particular critique of hip-hop studies and the narrative around hip-hop. And the communities that have produced hip-hop, the Black and brown communities that produce hip-hop are materially no better off today than 50 years ago. So I thought I would ask you to reflect on any of that and answer the question, how should today's youth interpret the politics of pop culture?
Just to kind of couch a couple of more things that I just said, because my question also alludes to this. This is a great question to hear finally, because I did not hear this answer he's about to give. Because again, I only know Mumia's name initially. The first people I heard it from was through hip hop. So like hip hop's current state is profoundly disappointing. As a person whose story is directly connected to that, I'm so interested in what he's about to say.
When you think about culture as it has been used historically by Black performers, it has been used as a tool, literally, of liberation. And think about this, during the Civil Rights Movement, the spirit of that movement was enmeshed in the music of the people. And the songs, right, were, like gospel-like and what W.B. Du Bois would call sorrow songs. It was the songs of the people that gave them the energy to march into the gates of hell, right, in the South. And to keep on marching, keep on marching, keep on marching until freedom is won, right? Our way of thinking about that period and our language is influenced by our knowledge of the music. On the other hand, what you had were really spectacular artists like Duke Ellington and Miles Davis and jazz artists, right, who were performing brilliantly and loved around the world. That's how they kind of circumvented the apartheid system in the United States. And then we come to hip hop. Think about this. Very few art forms in our post-slavery history have lived as long as hip hop, to the exclusion of other forms of music. Because if you think about it, for a while now, our music developed like almost on a 30-year structure, right? And some were like shorter than that. I read the book about funk, right? And how funk got displaced by disco, right? Now that's a corporate way of looking at the music, but you cannot think about the music without thinking about the corporate forces that have profited from the music. And I speak here not of the MCs or performers or even some of the great businessmen in hip-hop, because for real, they took pennies, right? While the distributors of that music took billions. How much money did hip-hop make? Hip-hop made roughly $68 billion a year. Now, if I'm part of the big five distributors, right, that are like eating this kind of cake, I'll pay somebody $400, $500, $600 million to produce this music, as long as I can distribute it and get my cut off the top, right? The computer system has disrupted that pay flow. But what we always have to think about is the political impact of our culture on the world and, more importantly, on ourselves. And I would tell brothers and sisters, when we walk in the yard and talk about this, I would say they have poisoned the well of our culture.
Right. What are the bars? I'm not gonna taint this by trying to add too much to what this man is saying. I just respond to some things in the chat. The first thing is people commenting going like his voice and his speaking cadence. Yeah. It's wild, especially considering that this man's been locked up for decades. Has health issues behind bars. There's been no deterioration of his mind, no deterioration of his analysis. So you're gonna hear me bumble through this question. I'm just gonna skip me talking. The gist of my question is basically what I said earlier, which is kind of continuing on Dr. Ball's question. I talked about the fact that I only know him via hip hop now, so what is hip hop's role kind of in the future of liberation? So I feel bad because I kind of asked the same exact question. I would have asked a different question, but again, none of what y'all just heard, I heard. I did not hear that on the call because it wasn't coming through my phone. So just the way y'all are hearing it for the first time, so am I. So I'm just going to skip right to him talking again.
During the civil rights movement, the spirit of that movement was enmeshed in the music of the people. And the songs, right, were, like gospel-like and what W.B. Du Bois would call sorrow songs. It was the songs of the people that gave them the energy to march into the gates of hell, right, in the South. And to keep on marching, keep on marching, keep on marching until freedom is won, right? Our way of thinking about that period and our language is influenced by our knowledge of the music. On the other hand, what you had were really spectacular artists like Duke Ellington and Miles Davis and jazz artists, right? Who were performing brilliantly and loved around the world. That's how they kind of circumvented the apartheid system in the United States. And then we come to hip hop. Think about this. Very few art forms in our post-slavery history have lived as long as hip hop, to the exclusion of other forms of music. Because if you think about it, for a while now, our music developed like almost on a 30-year structure, right? And some were like shorter than that. You know, I read the book about funk, right? And how funk got displaced by disco, right? Now that's a corporate way of looking at the music, but you cannot think about the music without thinking about the corporate forces that have profited from the music. And I speak here not of the MCs or performers or even some of the great businessmen in hip-hop, because for real, they took pennies, right? While the distributors of that music took billions. How much money did hip-hop make? Hip-hop made roughly $68 billion a year. Now, if I'm part of the big 5 distributors, right, that are like eating this kind of cake, I'll pay somebody $400, $500, $600 million to produce this music, as long as I can distribute it and get my cut off the top, right? The computer system has disrupted that pay flow. But what we always have to think about is the political impact of our culture on the world and, more importantly, on ourselves. And I would tell brothers and sisters, when we walk in the yard and talk about this, I would say they have poisoned the well of our culture, right? You cannot do the kind of music that was done in the funk era, right? In the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. You cannot do that kind of music and find anyone to produce or distribute your music. And even now, I was told that for a lot of people in that world, unless you are famous, right, like some of the brothers you mentioned, they can't make a buck. They cannot make a dollar, right? But more importantly is, what's the impact on culture and consciousness? Is it serving the cause of freedom and liberation, right? And giving voice to the oppressed, what Fanon called the wretched of the earth. If it's not giving voice to them, it's giving voice to something else and someone else. I have an image in my head of a broker on Wall Street, you know, and he's driving his whip back home, and his windows are rolled up, and he's listening to hip-hop because that music celebrates profit making and money more than any other music in American culture. And, you know, I'm a white guy. I'm in my 40s or 50s. I'm rich as Croesus. But I'm in my car and I'm listening to, you know, people scream about wealth and money. And the people that scream about it because they ain't got it. Right? They want it. But guess what? The cat in that car got it and loves the music. Because it's a praise song to property, to capital, to wealth, and really economic predation. That's what I think about it. What would Huey P. Newton and Eldridge Cleaver have done with what we call social media? They would have blown it up. They would have used it as a tool of building revolutionary struggle, right? And when I talk to young people, when I explain to them what a mimeograph machine is, they look at me as if I'm talking about, a horse and buggy, because they don't know what that is. They have never heard that word. We used to make leaflets with a machine called the mimeograph machine, and we would sometimes roll it with our hands or push a button and it would roll it, because we would make out the stencil, type it out, draw on it, and do other things, and then run those leaflets off, right, and go into the streets and pass it on to the people, right? What if Huey or Eldridge had access to the media that everybody has in their pocket? Instead of trying to use the legacy media, the corporate media, the white supremacist media, what if they had direct access? And think about this. Think about the case of George Floyd. A 17-year-old girl had a cell phone in her pocket, pulled it out, turned it on, went live, and changed the world. In one moment, in one day. And it charged people all around the world. Now, that's communication. And that's consciousness. She was awake enough at 17 to see what she was seeing and determined to make sure that others saw it live. And then imagine what would have happened if no one had turned on their phone or had a phone. Come on, man. You know what would have happened. Not a damn thing. So, it comes back to consciousness. And as the old saying goes, you use it or you lose it. It's not just a toy. It is communication. I don't call it social media. I call it anti-social media. When I read about little girls committing suicide because she was exposed to an algorithmic rage against her, and the machines fed that poison to her, and it drove her to the end of her rope and drove her to kill herself. That's anti-social media. So we have to use it for liberatory purposes, or it will use us for destructive purposes.
It's hearing that right now is real surreal. It's really surreal. Going back to we'll call it internet beef. I've been kind of pontificating on this of it all when it comes to social action and politics and liberation movements. Oh my God. Because I'm hearing Mumia talk about what Huey and the Panthers would have done with social media. The thing that I don't think they could have predicted is the sophistication of the apparatus as a counterinsurgency tool. As literally, and this is for the replay, as you're watching this, right, most of you did not hear what he said because there was a Ritz cracker commercial that played in the middle of it. Is that correct, chat? A Ritz cracker commercial got played in the middle of him talking. It's so profoundly demonic. I'm reading this at the behest of Dr. Ball as I'm working on this project, and I'm kind of thinking through what he just said when he said he calls it anti-social media. He just said something that I may end up using this clip.
So we have to use it for liberatory purposes, or it will use us for destructive purposes.
The mic drop in that is so profound to me. But the thing I'm gonna focus on when I get to this is a lot of people, from my perspective, mistake what they're doing as liberatory when in actuality it is destructive. a lot of people online with platforms have been tricked by these algorithms, by the fact that these companies are the medium of social media rewards engagement, rewards rage bait, rewards that cycle, into thinking that when they feed that cycle, that they're doing something useful.
I just want to ask, in my Intro to Black Studies class, we're using Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. Could you say anything to my class just real quick about what do you think of our use of that text in this class for that purpose?
You ain't gonna believe this. I was thinking about George this morning, and I was wondering how many, young students and young people who are not in college, right? You ain't got to be in college to read George Jackson, but wondering how many people read him and wonder what he read, right? And this man read almost anything he could get his hands on, and he read it to the bone. You hear me? He read it to the bone. And he had like Palestinian poetry, right, in his cell, because the world was a potential field for revolution in the 1960s. He read everything he could get his hands on, right? And so to have him read, hopefully gives insight to young people into how the world was, not just in the 1960s, but why it is the way it is today. That's the important question, right? And who was George Jackson? George Jackson, in Soledad prison and in San Quentin throughout his career in prisons, he was named the field marshal of the Central Committee of the Black Panther Party. And at his funeral, what did Huey say? He said, George Jackson was my hero. He said, George Jackson was my hero. Because George fought with everything within him for the struggle, for freedom, and for revolution, and against the repressive apparatus in the U.S. And in every one of his books, he writes, and his letters to his parents, to his father and to his mother, he writes about the struggle because it's always uppermost in his mind, in his thinking. So it is a wonderful thing that students and non-students get to read George Jackson and to get to think about his thoughts while he was in solitary in a prison cell. Because he talked about everything. He thought about everything. And that's what has to be studied. Yeah.
That's right on. Thank you. And I do like to point out that presiding over his funeral services was Father Earl Neal, who would later, as I believe his last act before retirement, preside over my wedding. So I like that. I do love that little connect. And by the way, Reagan died on my wedding day. I liked it, and we raised a glass, by the way. So I like it. So it was a beautiful moment. Anyway,
say good time and old head.
Hearing Dr. Ball mention George Jackson, and that's like the intro studies class, Black Studies class text, which is amazing. But I think I heard you mention, non-college students engaged. Okay, I couldn't remember what I asked here. So basically, I asked about where people can start in terms of political education. Because, not everybody's going to take a Black Studies class, let alone one with, Dr. Jared Ball, or even just a Black professor sometimes. So I think that's the gist of what I asked here. So I'm gonna skip to his answer.
In the most of you.
If you give 3 to 5 books, that will be a good starting point.
Okay. Again,
I got to pause for a second. It's wild. Like, I did not hear him respond to me, but hearing him respond to me like via the actual audio, it like is hitting me like, oh shit, I was really talking. I was really talking to Mumia Abu-Jamal. Sorry, that was a real tangent, but it's just like occurring to me that this was happening. Because in the moment, I was really frustrated and just kind of holding my phone in my hand. Like, anyway.
I know Dr. Ball knows what I'm doing right now in terms of my studies. But right now, I'm rereading the Huey Newton Reader. And what the Huey Newton Reader really is a compilation of several of his books, Revolutionary Suicide, To Die for the People, and some of the articles that were published in the Black Panther Party's newspaper, The Black Panther. Huey was a brilliant dude, man. He, and I felt that when I was 15 years old, But to reread him these years later, I am always blown away by his writing, his thinking, and how he looked at the world. Everyone has an ideology that's a way of looking at the world based on their political beliefs and assumptions and, in some ways, certainties, right? But that only means something if that ideological theory is correct about what's happening in the world and what will happen. In 1970, Huey wrote an article that criticized and condemned the USSR for what was called peaceful coexistence. That is that the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, that a lot of people called Russia, but it was a part of a bigger federation, announced that it would peacefully coexist with the capitalist empire of the United States of America. Huey said his understanding of what that meant was that we don't really have nations anymore. We have scattered communities, right? And we have entities that call themselves nations. But he said whenever there is an empire, that empire really rules around the world. And look at what's happening this very day. When the U.S. goes into Venezuela and steals not just their president and the first lady, but their oil, tons of their oil. It's mine, I'm taking it. I mean, and look what's happening right now, right, in Iran. Right? So, Huey said, if the empire can come into your country and take capital out, then you don't have a country, right? You can talk all you want. You can say this is a socialist country and we believe so and so and so. But what the capitalist cares about is capital, period. And he looked at like a Beatles concert, right, in Moscow. And he saw all of these young Muscovites, young Russians, going to concerts, and they were wearing blue jeans, right? And they were singing Beatles songs, and they were drinking Coca-Cola, and there were ads for Coca-Cola in the country. And he called that, that was his ideology was intercommunalism. Intercommunalism. And he said, all of these countries that claim to be countries, they have embassies, they have offices, they have flags. But he said, that's not a nation. If you cannot control what comes in and what goes out, you can call yourself anything, but you can't call yourself a nation. Because if the capitalists can do that, they own you. He said that about maybe 20, 25, 28 years before the Soviet Union dissolved and packed it in, and essentially committed suicide as an international federation of states and republics. I just wanted to say another book that I think kids should read and young people should read is The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. You know, it's true I read it when I was 14, but I was a nerd. And it was mind-blowing. And when I read it today, it is still mind-blowing. Right? I get more of it today than I did when I was 14, of course. But The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon used to be called The Handbook of the Black Revolution. And this was this cat from Martinique in the West Indies. He went to France and then was sent to Algiers as a psychiatrist after he got his medical degree in France. And he joined the revolution. He joined the FLN, the National Liberation Front in Algiers. And he became a revolutionary. And he writes about that. I mean, he wrote like 5 or 6 books, but The Wretched of the Earth is his masterpiece. And it's when kids read it, they will remember it to their last day on Earth. There's another book that isn't well known, but I think would be important, especially for black students to read. And it's the biography of Olaudah Equiano.
Hey,
and this was an African who was caught in Africa with his sister, walked to, hundreds of miles with his sister and put on a boat and put in captivity in chains and brought to London and then the United States. And he writes about that. He writes about remembering seeing his mother in battle with a sword. He remembers, his tribe and what they were taught as children.